I got a question for you. What should you do when trouble hits your life? I need you to think about that. What should you do when trouble hits your life? Now, if you don't have an answer for it, you're in the right place, because I want to break down how we should handle trials on this edition of A Moment of Truth. Ladies and gentlemen, if the truth be told, everyone watching this video today is either headed towards a storm, in the middle of a storm, or coming out of a storm. In other words, everybody that's watching right now is in one of those three categories. Either you're headed towards a storm, in the middle of a storm, or coming out of a storm. Now, how do I know this? It's because no one is exempt from facing trials or tribulation. Nobody escaped trouble. If you're a human being living on this planet today, you cannot escape trouble. I don't care who you is. You could be the greatest bishop, the best prophet. You could be a celebrity, as famous as you're going to be. You still going to face some trials and tribulation in this life. Nobody escaped life without trials and tribulation. Jesus said it himself in John chapter 16, verse 33. Look what it says. These things have I spoken to you, so that in me you may have peace. In the world you have tribulation, but take courage. I have overcome the world. That's good right there. But I want to bring up my wretched version. I call it the wretched version, the Message translation. Look what it says. In this godless world, you will continue to experience difficulties, but take heart. I've conquered the world. Do you realize what Jesus is telling us through this text? What Jesus is saying to you and I through this conversation with his disciples is that the enemy is not just going to let you go through life unchallenged. That's basically what he's saying, that the enemy is not going to let you or I go through this life unchallenged. And of course, when I say enemy, I'm referring to Satan. I'm referring to the devil. He's our enemy, and he's not going to just sit back and allow us to go through life unchallenged. He's not just going to sit idly by and allow us to have a great marriage. He's not just going to look the other way while you experience a life of prosperity and peace. He's not just going to sit by and observe you raising your children in the fear and admonition of the Lord and not do something about it. No, he's our adversary. That's what the Bible calls him, our adversary. That word adversary means bringer of conflict. So he's always going to bring drama. He's always going to bring conflict into our life. That's his job. That's his ammo. That's what he comes to do when he shows up, to bring drama into our life, to bring conflict. In other words, to bring resistance. He want to bring resistance. He do not want to let us experience the life that God intended us to live. So he's going to try to bring resistance into our life. So the question is not will you go through something, but the question is, what are you going to do when you do go through something? That's what I'm trying to get y'all to understand today, is that we're all going to go through something. So that's not the question. What are you going to do when you do go through something? And this is the topic of our moment of truth today. I want to show you two things that I believe will help us in the midst of any trial and tribulation. I call these things the believer's survival tips. These are the believer's survival tips that I'm giving you. And these are two tips I want to give you to help you survive the most challenging situations. Y'all want to get to it? Let's go. John chapter 14, verse 1. John chapter 14, verse 1 says this: do not let your heart be troubled. Let's pause right there. The A clause, that's all we need. Do not let your heart be troubled. Do not let your heart be troubled. And I pray you caught that. Jesus gives us the first thing we have to do when we find ourselves facing an arduous situation. And that is to make the decision not to allow our hearts to be troubled. What does that mean? That means don't panic. That's what he's saying. Don't let your heart be troubled means don't panic. In other words, watch this. There may be trouble on the outside. Don't allow trouble to get on the inside. Did y'all hear me? You're going to experience, that's unavoidable. You're going to experience trouble on the outside, but don't allow that trouble on the outside to get on the inside. When you allow the trouble on the outside to get on the inside, it produces something called panic. And that's when you allow your heart to be troubled. So Jesus in the text gives us survival tip number 1. Don't panic. Don't panic. Christ says, do not let your heart be troubled. He's saying, don't panic. Don't allow your heart to be consumed with anxiety. Don't allow fear to grip your emotions. And don't allow your emotions to cause you to respond contrary to the word of God. Matter of fact, let me put up the definition of panic so you really can see it. Panic is a very strong feeling of anxiety or fear that makes you act without thinking carefully. It's right there on the screen. A very strong feeling of anxiety or fear that makes you act without thinking carefully. So basically, panic is to be consumed with fear to the point that you respond in fear. And when you respond in fear, you respond without thinking. Y'all hear me? When you respond in fear, you respond without thinking. And this is why the enemy wants you to panic. Because he wants you to respond to every circumstance and situation without thinking carefully. Because if we could respond to every circumstance and situation without thinking carefully, we'll sabotage our own life. Y'all hear me? Ladies and gentlemen, it's critical that we get it, because your first reaction to a crisis could determine the outcome of that crisis. Can I say that one more time? Your first reaction to a crisis could determine the outcome of that crisis. In other words, your first response in the battle may determine if you win or lose that battle. So the very first thing we have to do it. And we can't let this go. We have to do it. We cannot allow our hearts to be troubled. We can't panic. When trouble hits us, when a problem arises, we got to make sure we don't panic. We can't allow ourselves to panic. Instead, we have to grab a hold of our emotions, grab a hold of our heart, and set it in the direction it should be going. We should set our heart towards the right thing. And what is that direction we should set our heart? What is the right thing we should set our hearts towards? And that is survival tip number 2, belief in God. Belief in God. Our hearts should be set on belief in God. Okay, can I prove it? Let's go to John chapter 14, verse 1. Let's read it in its entirety. John chapter 14, verse 1. Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. Let your heart not be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. Ladies and gentlemen, this verse not only commands us not to panic, it also shows us the way not to panic. I just love it, because when God gives us a command, I love how he commands us to do something and then also gives us the way to perform what he commands us to do. Did y'all understand that? He not only commands us not to panic, but he also shows us the way to not panic. And the way not to panic is to believe in God. That is it. That is the remedy for panic. Belief in God. In other words, this famous Johannine text tells you and I that the way we make the decision not to allow our hearts to be troubled is we have to believe in God. And that word belief means to have total trust and complete confidence in God and his ability to bring us out. Can I say that one more time? To have belief means to have total trust and complete confidence in your God and his ability to bring you out. This means the way I trouble my trouble is to trust God. See, we always allowing trouble to come and trouble us. But the way you trouble your trouble is trusting in God. Ladies and gentlemen, it's our faith in God that gives us our true security. No matter what happens, be it in our health, relationships, personal finances, or any aspect of our life, it is your faith in God that will remind you that everything will work together for your good. That everything that's going down is going to somehow work for your favor. Because God's involved. Because you have faith in your God. This thing is going to work together for your good. That God is going to turn it around. See, what the enemy meant for evil, God is going to turn it to work for your favor. I believe God is trying to get us to a place that instead of dwelling on the problem and its potential of taking us out, we start dwelling on our God and his ability to use that problem to take us up. I'm going to say that again so you can hear me clearly. God is trying to get you and I to a place that instead of dwelling on the problem and its potential of taking us out, we start dwelling on our God and his ability to use that problem to take us up. His ability to use that circumstance and situation to be a stepping stone into your destiny. Oh, yes, he can do it. He can work all things together for our good. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I stated at the beginning of this feeble dissertation, the key to not losing the battle is not to panic. And the key to overcoming panic is to believe in your God. Did y'all hear me? The way we are not going to lose the battle is not to panic. And the key to not panicking is having trust in your God, to believe in him. Because to trust God is to refuse to panic. To trust God is to refuse to fear. And I don't know where you are in your life right now. You may be facing your darkest hour. But even in your darkest hour, you need to lean on your God. You must trust him. You got to refuse to panic. And you got to make sure that you're trusting in your God. You're trusting in your God to make this thing right. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? God wants us to trust him. He wants us to put our total trust, our total confidence in him and his ability to bring us out. That's how we got to live. We got to live in our belief for God. So in closing, if we want to survive the storm, if we want to be able to thrive in the midst of an arduous situation, we got to do two things. Survival tip number one, don't panic. We can't panic. And survival tip number two, we have to believe in God. If we keep a hold of these two things, if we grab a hold of these two things, we'll be able to face any storm. And the storm or the trouble in your life won't be able to trouble you, but you will be able to trouble it. All right. This has been a truth moment with Corey Mcdonald. And if this message has been a blessing to you, why don't you subscribe to this channel right now? Hit that subscribe button so that you never miss another moment here on The Truth Television. All right. God bless y'all. Enjoy the rest of your day.